of this message, the amount of just conversation that we've been having following these messages, whether it's in email or in person, when people are talking about all the things that God is doing in their life and what God has been speaking to them through this series. Even before I started preaching this series, when Dr. Lee has been sharing, and also what Pastor Raymond has been sharing, and also we've been taking the time to make sure we talk about very clearly what it is that we're trying to accomplish and what we're trying to do in the kingdom assignment in this house. And if you're attached to this house, then it's very important that you know what you're attached to and what we're believing God for. And that's the reason why we've been taking this time. It's the reason why we've been, delivering these messages in a manner in which we have. And so I'm excited to continue to see what God is going to continue to do. Let me briefly recap what we did, talked about last week, and then we'll go forward into the message that we have today. But it all started about finding out what you're passionate about. And in the very first week of this series, we handed out all those index cards, and I asked you what breaks your heart. What is it that you're passionate about? And everyone wrote what they're passionate about, and I read them many times, and Pastor Raymond has read those, and also Dr. Lee has read those, and they're just interesting to see just how different, the passions that are represented here in this ministry, right? But also very similar, how many of you all are passionate about the very same thing. And the thing that we have to know, which is important, is just us coming together, unified as a group. And so we talked about that the burden that you bear is often a calling that you will embrace. And that's how you know what you're passionate about. There's many things that you're really passionate about, and God's saying, I've equipped you and I've burdened your heart for that, so that way you can do something about it. We've been talking about Nehemiah, and everyone is familiar with the story of Nehemiah, but I also said last week that an inward change should have an external manifestation, right? Nehemiah was praying about, and he was fasting, and he was mourning when he was presented with the news. And then approximately 4 months later, when he was in the presence of the king saw the sadness in him, and that's what started the whole process, right? Because an inward change should have an external manifestation if you're truly passionate about something. We talk about standing strong in the face of opposition. And anytime that God leads you to do anything good, meaningful, generous, lasting, you have to expect some form of opposition. You have to expect some form of obstacles or some form of resistance. And we were reading in Nehemiah chapter 3, and the thing that encouraged us, and we had a great time last week because we were talking about the active participation. It wasn't people just saying that they were going to do something. It was people actively working together. It was a community effort, right? And it's just interesting to see what is possible when people come together. We live in a time that is so divisive. It's always, this side versus that side, or this versus that. And I know that the enemy uses that because he knows how much power you have when you come together. I had a conversation with, at work, I did a leadership class for some young leaders at work. And one thing I told them is that your generation has the ability to change the entire world. I said, if you guys came together as a millennial generation and decided, what direction you want this country to go, you have enough influence and enough power to change things, whether it's political, whatever it is, because just the sheer number. But the key is that so many we get disenfranchised with what's going on, and the people aren't wanting to come together. But there's power and there's strength and unity. And we talked about what they did in Nehemiah chapter 3 when they all came together, right? The leaders, they led by example. And we learned about that in Nehemiah chapter 3, verse 1, where the high priest was the first one who stepped up to work on the sheep gate. I gave y'all a quote that I've been saying is that it's better for 10 people to work than for one person to do the work of 10 people. All right? We also talked about last week that not everyone's going to work. And I had an encouraging message for those who are not going to work. And it was very, very encouraging and edifying message. It said, get out of the way. If you're not going to work, then get out of the way, but don't hinder the process of what God is trying to do. We also talked about last week that some people will do more work than others, and that's okay. Many times in Nehemiah chapter 3, it talked about that someone repaired one wall, and once they finished that wall, then they went on to the next. It didn't say that for everybody, but some people did more work than others. Some people worked at home. And I said, talk about that spiritual principle that many times that, people want to do great things, but you got to take care of the house first. You can't go out there and just be living reckless any kind of way at home and then expecting God to elevate you to do great things in your life. And so we talked about that spiritual principle. And then we said, we talked again. You take care of his house, he'll take care of yours. And one of the interesting things was like in Nehemiah chapter 3, verse 1, when they talk about Eliashib being the high priest, and he was working on the sheep gate, then they talk about this other individual who was zealous in his working, was working on his house. And I said that if you take care of God's house, God's going to be taking care of your house. We got excited about that part because, you know, people who get excited about that are the people who are actively working for the kingdom. Case in point, yesterday when, not yesterday, but Friday, my wife called me. She said, hey, are you expecting an 18-wheeler? I said, yeah, I'm expecting an 18-wheeler on August 6th. And she was like, well, it's here now. I said, no, it's not. She said, well, I'm looking at it. It's parked right in front of the church. And I said, well, I'm in Galveston. There's no way that I can get here. And so, but again, when you take care of God's house, God's going to take care of your house. And so she said, well, the good news is that Michelle, Adrian, and Dwayne just happened to be at the church. They were sorting backpacks. And I got excited because they said, don't worry about it, we got it. And it reminded me of what we had just been preaching about, that if you take care of God's house, God's going to take care of your house. And I got excited because sometimes we just say, oh man, everything just fell into place. It's not everything just fall into place. God is right there orchestrating every single step. And so you may be small to you, but I realized I was not able to stop what I was doing, but God's saying the work must go forward. So you think about your steps are ordered. I said, God, I thank you that things just fall into place, God, that people are where they need to be. They didn't know why they're there, but God, you know why they're there. And it encouraged me. Because I said, I'm going to be there, and then the driver saying, well, if there wasn't no one here to unload it, then we would have to reschedule. We would have to leave. I said, God, thank you for always looking ahead. Lord, I thank you that, Lord, as I can, and it encouraged me saying, I will stay about my Father's business, and when I'm about my Father's business, then He makes sure He takes care of my business. The people who get excited about that are the people who are actually doing stuff. Knowing that, God, everything I do, my labor is not in vain. God, everything that I'm doing, God, you're taking care of the things behind the scenes. Every time it things you say, God, it's I don't know how it just turned in my favor, how it all just fell into place. It's because that principle. You get about your Father's business and watch how He takes care of the things that you didn't know how you were going to do. You take care of His house. So I publicly thank Dwayne and Michelle and Adrian for all the work they've done. They did. I can't tell you how high those boxes were, how heavy they were. But they did a tremendous work, and I really do appreciate you guys for doing that work. Thank you. They didn't know that I was going to say that, but I just want to publicly acknowledge the effort, because I could not have done it. We also talked about last week that these people, when they were building the wall, this community building the wall, that it was no professional wall builders. There were nobles and citizens and political leaders and ordinary men and women building this wall. And so that just tells me that, many times we think that God is, we are not qualified enough. God's saying, I'm not looking at your ability, I'm looking at your availability. But we talked about as they started making progress that everyone does not like progress. We talked a little bit about Sanballat and Tobiah, who were upset not only at just the attempt that they were making, but the progress. And we said that if the enemy can't stop you from starting, then they're going to stop you from finishing. Then you have to brace yourself again. For those who weren't here last week, I said something and I stepped on a lot of toes with this statement. I said, stop behaving your way out of your blessed place. You want God to do something in your life, you got to stop behaving your way out of your blessed place. You're saying, okay, well, every time I come here, every time I'm connected, Lord, I feel so good. And then sometimes we get distracted and we start going astray. And that's the thing is, we have to stop behaving our way out of our blessed place because we know we want God to do, and we know what God is doing. Right? We said opposition is the enemy of progress. You want to continue to make progress, opposition is going to stop you from making that progress. In Nehemiah chapter 4, verse 10, it says, meanwhile, the people in Judah said, the strength of the laborer is giving out, and there is so much rubble that we cannot rebuild the wall. And I told you guys that we can't trust ourselves when we get tired. Because many times what the enemy wants to wear you out so that way you're not thinking clearly. And I said also that the external opposition will only be as loud as your internal insecurities will allow them to be. So just the other day, someone sent me a picture of myself that was probably about 15 years ago, right? I was slimmer, and I had a full head of hair. And they said, Pastor Ray, who is this guy? And I looked at that picture and I was like, and just for a second I started reminiscing and I started thinking about my scripture. I was like, get thee behind me, Satan. Say, who gave me permission to dance on my insecurities today? I said, I've embraced this bald head and this dad bod. I've embraced it. But again, the external opposition will only be as loud as your internal insecurities will allow them to be. And I asked you guys some very important questions, and we'll start transitioning to what we want to talk about today. I asked yourself, how do you respond to conflict? There's a question that you need to answer. How do you respond to conflict? So when you start thinking about how you respond to it, also ask yourself proactively, how can you prepare for conflict? Nehemiah chapter 4, verse 14 says, don't be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, who is great and awesome, and fight for your families, your sons and your daughters, your wives and your homes. Right? And so I said, you're going to have to not only just work, but you're also going to have to fight. It doesn't matter if you're doing a great thing. You think just because you're doing a great thing that the enemy is going to sit back and not try to attack you? Yeah, I'm saying I'm trying to be a good parent, I'm trying to be a good spouse, I'm trying to be a good employee, I'm trying to be a good Christian. You think the enemy is just going to sit back because of your great intentions? You think that you're not going to have to fight just because you're doing a good thing? You think that you're not going to be challenged in certain areas of your life? You have to work and you have to fight. If you want to continue to make the progress and see God continue to move on your behalf, if you don't want to behave yourself out of your blessed place, then you're going to have to work and you're going to have to fight to stay and continue to move on what God has in store for you. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Just because you're doing a good thing, that does not mean you're not going to be challenged. Nehemiah chapter 4, starting with verse 15 says, when our enemies heard that we were aware of the plot and that God had frustrated. We want to pause right there. When our enemies heard that we were aware of their plot and that God had frustrated it. Right there, I just stopped. So, Lord, I thank you for every plan that the enemy has that you've frustrated on my behalf, God.
Yes, Lord.
Every scheme, every ill attempt, every fiery dart that someone has tried to shot my way that maybe I'm not even aware of, God. Those who just don't like me but don't know why they don't like me, God. Those who just are being ignorant and being difficult just to be ignorant and be difficult, God. God, I thank you that even though, Father, that they have ill intent, God, I thank you that if you're for me, God, it does not matter who's against me, God. That every evil scheme, every fiery dart of the enemy, God, I thank you, God, that you can frustrate it. Because I'm about your business. It does not mean that the darts won't come. It does not mean that the damage will not come. But what it means is that God is there saying, you know what? You just continue to go forward. I got you. Every scheme. You stay about my business. Every scheme, every dart, you're going to be equipped with what you need in order to go forward. Because the plan was great. It says when our enemies heard that we were aware of their plot. Enemy, I know what you're trying to do. He does the same things over and over again. And why does he do the same things over and over again? Because they work. You know the area that you're going to be challenged in. I told y'all about my story. That on Sunday morning, every night, now is, me and my wife have been married, it'll be 14 years, but early in our marriage, Sunday morning was the best day for a disagreement on our way to church. We'd wake up Saturday, have the best night of our lives. And Sunday she would turn into a woman that I don't know. And I'll turn into a guy that I don't know either. And we would call ourselves going to the house of the Lord. We're snapping at the kids. All they want to know is what's for breakfast. What's in the refrigerator? Just angry, right? But it's important that we laughed about that, but I told y'all how important it was that you can't behave your way out, not to behave your way out of your blessed place. And in me, I'm always transparent. I told you there's been many occasions where before I'm on this platform that I had to call my wife out and say, you know what, I understand we have some things to talk about, but before I will not get on this stage until we come into agreement. I've done that. Transparent, I'll be transparent. And I don't do that to give myself kudos, but I'm saying that that's the requirement. If you really want God to move on your behalf, you just can't be acting any kind of way. I'm not exempt. She'll tell you. I'll pull out on the surface saying, look, I know we still got something to talk about. And we talk, we come to a common ground, we pray, and then I'm out the platform. It's happened at least 4 times that I can think of. And that's what's important. Right? Because we know the enemy, that's what the enemy wants to do. And we can't allow, we want him to frustrate the plans, but we're being a willing participant in the frustration. But the great thing about this verse 15, it says that after it said God had frustrated, it said we all returned to the wall, each to our own work. Right? So after each goal, they got back to work. It wasn't a time to relax and, well, all right, I've done my part. Because Nehemiah could never forget the timeline that he had. And I've been telling you about getting prepared for your yes. He got in front of the king. The king says, what is it that you want? And if he was not in the 4 months prior to that, he had to be getting prepared for that yes. He had to think about all the things that it would take and the resources that he would need, the amount of time. And I said, God, it's important that we are prepared. But the thing is, all of these obstacles and all these things that happened, he had to make sure that he was still keeping in mind the timeline that he said. What is it that you want? How long will you be gone? And when will you be back? So every challenge that Nehemiah had, he had to think about that. What is it that you want? How long will you be gone? And when are you coming back? Because that does not change. So just because you have obstacles, if you already committed saying, this is what I'm going to do, this is when I'm going to do it, this is how it's going to get done, then there's a level of integrity that you have to make sure that you deliver, especially when you're working for the kingdom. We're trying to break our word and not be a man and woman of our word, and that's not acceptable these days. It's never been acceptable. And so it's important to realize that. And verse 16 says, from that day on, half my men did the work, while the other half were equipped with spears, shields, bows, and armor. The officers posted themselves behind all the people of Judah. Right? That's what it says. So that tells me that intercession was critically important. We know that's critically important. We know that how important it is to have people being on guard and praying while others still are working. Let's paint a picture. Elder Protho, if you come up here real quick, I just need you to come here and stand right here, facing that way. Elder Vernon, if you can come and stand right here, let me stand right here. Right here. There you go. There you go. All right. You stand here and you represent, you working, right? So we have one person who's working, while the other person is watching their back. We have one person that's praying, while the other person is also constantly working. And that's how the picture looks. He's saying, you know what, you just continue to do what I've called you to do, and don't worry about anything else. And that's what God is saying in this scripture right here. It's saying that if you get about my business, that's the reason why we all have a role to play in the process. That's the reason why we can't be isolated. That's the reason why we have to have accountability in these important relationships. That's why it's important to open your mouth and talk about the things that you're passionate about. Because you say, you know what, I'm passionate about this, and realizing that there's somebody else across this room that's passionate about the same thing. So I'm working while he's praying. He has nothing to worry about. So he can focus. He's saying, I don't have to worry about what's going on back there because I know someone has my back.